Artillery is awesome, and ever since I went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma as a child and saw tons of artillery pieces, I knew if I could lead an army, I would have them. Then I started playing games like Total War Napoleon, Tom Clancy's End War, and Hell Let Loose, and realized just how broken artillery is. Who would have thought being able to fire across the map high explosive rounds of death without any real retaliation would be such a viable option. So, it's no surprise when I picked up 40k in 9th that I would end up having 2 basilisks and a wyvern in my 1000-point army, while reading about just how devastating they were in novels like Gaunt's Ghost. And with newer models like the Bombast field gun and artillery teams, I think it's a good time we got into artillery, particularly field guns and howitzers. Talk about specific pieces, their uses, how they're defined, and how they compare to the big guns in our world. And before you ask, yes, I'm including some models in Legends as well. There's one that's just too good to pass up. The birthplace of artillery pretty much stems from centuries of people building walls and those same walls being torn down, leading to someone saying, hey, I see how mortars are using metal balls that explode instead of rocks. Why not shoot those into the wall and blow it up that way? This is where we really see howitzers begin to come into its own. Before then, there was 2 distinctions for artillery: field guns and mortars. Field guns fired straight and could not elevate any higher than 45 degrees, while mortars couldn't depress below 45 degrees. The howitzer could do both, and this gave it versatility. Throw in slower burning fuses, rifling, and improved gunpowder, and by the 1900s, they were an integral part of any army, where in World War I, they were the leading cause of death by weapons of war. Does this concept still apply in the 42nd millennium? Absolutely. I mean, hell, everyone who likes Guard knows about how the Death Corps flattened a city over years with the constant use of artillery. It's no wonder they got away with that when there was no reliable enemy cast, and the only way they could counter Krieg artillery was using their artillery to shoot the Krieg artillery, and without proper observers and accurate maps was difficult since the artillery in question was kilometers away. And we haven't even mentioned the types of shells arties can shoot, which is why they're so deadly. Enemy in light cover, use HE. Out in the open, airburst fragmentation. In a trench, gas. In the woods, white phosphorus. You know, the incendiary material that can be on fire, dipped in water, and immediately catch back on fire when pulled out, where the only way to treat someone hit with it is to cut out the piece of flesh that's burning before it has time to burn deeper into the body. It also makes for a really good smoke screen, hence smoke rounds to cover your friends from enemy fire, though some argue just lighting your enemies on fire works just fine. Then there's flare shells, that are essentially giant flares on parachutes that allow you to see at night. Of course, these aren't hard set rules on when to apply specific rounds, but it really emphasizes just how broken artillery is. The only factor that halfway keeps it balanced is accuracy and logistical support. There's a reason the Krieg, a siege regiment like artillery, because your enemy is locked to a central location, typically an urban area, with no outside forces to render aid, nor sufficient armament in the city to provide counter-battery fire. This means the siege regiment can just post up outside with all the time in the world to set up their arties, bring up sufficient ammo, range their shots, and using the largest, therefore slowest, and most logistical intensive guns that are capable of destroying the city walls. It might take years, but if the supply lines are there, then they can and will fire for years, until the enemy surrenders, or just keep shelling the city until there's no signs of life, and then shell it some more. Krieg has done that before. Now, your more mobile regiments can't use heavy siege weapons on carriages, as by the time the artillery crew gets there, sets up, and is ready to fire, which could take like 5 to 8 hours, the line has already moved to the guns' max firing range because everyone else are in motorized vehicles. So we solved that by putting the artillery piece on a Chimera chassis and have the artillery drive with the vehicles, albeit in the back of the column. This allows them to get from firing position to firing position in no time, preventing counter battery fire, and keeping up with a rapidly moving front line to provide heavy fire support. They're also capable at killing some armored vehicles in a pinch. Don't get me wrong, give them anti-tank shells and they'll make a decent tank destroyer, but if the round is large enough, even high explosive rounds can kill a tank. Example. This is a Ho-Ro, a self-propelled gun where they put a 15-centimeter gun on a tank chassis. It's important to know that by 1940, these guns were considered obsolete for artillery. But it turns out, when that can shoot an 80-pound projectile, it can be a problem for tanks. Sure, HE isn't known for being a tank killer until you realize that HE shell contains 15 pounds worth of TNT. For comparison, the M830, a shell fired by the Abrams tank, contains a little over 5 pounds worth of TNT explosives. 15 pounds of explosives is enough to brute force its way through 55 millimeters of armor, which sounds mediocre. The Tiger H1 has armor over double that, except for one part: the top of the hole that the turret swivels above. It's only 25 or 40 millimeters depending on the iteration. Either way, this round can defeat both of those, meaning this tank can feasibly take out a Tiger through sheer explosive force so long as they hit the turret, allowing the explosion to be next to the top of the chassis. But is this something that we can use to show that a Basilisk could be anti-armor? More importantly, let's start comparing guard artillery to ours. And let's start with the Bombast Field Gun. Given its range and indirect fire, it is artillery and not an anti-tank cannon, which strength 7 is the weakest of what we're looking at, and just based on the sight would be considered light artillery. A good comparison would be the British L118 light gun, a 105 cannon weighing at 4,500 pounds, firing 35-pound shells with an explosive mass of 5 pounds. With a max range of 20 kilometers. The 105 has enough explosive force to punch through 27 millimeters of armor, which is enough to pretty much one-shot a Puma. Other Puma. That's in line with what you would expect out of Strength 7, the ability to be a threat to light vehicles and heavy infantries. And this is a good spot as any to explain why HE is so good with artillery, and why you don't need SPGs to carry anti-tank ammunition. 1. The explosive force doesn't degrade over distance like AP shells do, as AP shells need to penetrate the target before exploding, hence the loss in velocity over long distances reduces penetration. A HE shell is just as deadly from a mile as it is from 100 meters. 2. While there are tank shells like squash head rounds that transfers energy into a tank like a Newton's cradle without needing penetration, and heat rounds that use shaped charges to penetrate, not requiring velocity from the shell to penetrate. However, these rounds are pigeonholed into being anti-armor. A basic HE round is good for anti-infantry and anti-fortifications. More flexibility in a single round means more rounds you can carry in an SPG that you will use instead of might. 3. HE is really good at finding the chink in the armor. You can fire a bolter at the breastplate of a Space Marine and its armor will tank the explosive force. Now sure, their breastplate might be able to tank the explosive force of a 105, but the joints between won't be able to, and they'll fail. Throw in the transfers of force, and even if the round doesn't penetrate, the kinetic force of the explosion will cause internal injuries to the body. We see this with people that suffer injuries from the force of bullets that are stopped by body armor. This is all banking on direct hits to the target. If you miss and the shell lands about 3 meters away, there's a good chance while the target will sustain some damage, it won't be lethal. That sounds crazy when you hear something like a 40mm grenade has a lethal range of 5 meters, until you account for roughly 80% of that range for HE being fragmentation, which of course light vehicles and Space Marines are pretty safe from that. For now, let's move on to something bigger. The Earthshaker cannon. This is the poster child for the guard artillery, specifically the Basilisks. A 132mm caliber artillery piece firing 83-pound shells from ranges of 15 to 100 kilometers, which is insane. That's like firing a cannon from Abbott, Texas, where Willie Nelson was born, and it landing at the Fort Worth Zoo. You'd expect that from a railway cannon, not an SPG. Let's start with the gun itself. In our world, we don't have 132mm. But if we were to compare the Earthshaker with something as commonly used by major militaries, it would be the M777 howitzer, arguably the best military equipment to come out of the UK in the 2000s. Weighing in at 4.5 tons, this gun is a beast with a 155mm barrel, firing 96-pound shells, carrying 15 pounds of explosives, and shake the earth it does. You can feel this shell hit the ground from 83 meters away, with its lethality range being a little over 4 meters explosive and about 18 meters frag. This absolutely fits the bill for what we would consider an Earthshaker cannon. This is my first complaint though. Strength 8? Sure, if we want to go canonically, 132 mils would make you think it's weaker than 155, but not to the point it's only marginally stronger than a 105. If we were to guess the weight of explosives in an Earthshaker shell by using proportions based on the weight of the shell GW gives us, And compared to the others in our world, which is about 15% explosive filler, we're looking at an explosive weight of 12.45 pounds. Turns out, we have a shell that fits this. The OF-530, a Russian HE shell for the 152mm cannon, weighing in at 88 pounds and 12 pounds of explosive filler. So while the caliber for the Earthshaker is lower, the overall size of the shell and explosive is comparable to the 155, which brings me back to the point that S8 is lacking and the 9th edition S10 was much more accurate. This can be and is a tank killer as long as you hit the turret, allowing the force to pierce through the chassis roof. Let's move on to the SPG we can compare to the Basilisk. This one might seem out of left field when we have so many World War II options, but it'll make sense in a second. The M109 Paladin. This SPG fires the American version of the 155 with the current being the M284. And the reason I choose this one is the range and its ability to perform accurate non-line of sight firing. The range was like all the other SPGs, set to fall way short of the 100km range, with the top range, even with rocket assisted shells, being a paltry 40 kilometers. But in 2016, after experimenting with hypervelocity rounds, they theorized it could extend the range to 93 kilometers. There have been some proven tests, but nothing that can be used in production. At best, the current record is 65 kilometers, which means the Paladin is our best bet for a SPG that matches the Basilisk. Now we need to talk about the siege cannon, because holy shit, this video is getting long and Editor Me is going to be pissed. Hi guys, Editor Navigator here. Turns out Past Me was right. I should have just done 2 videos of this, but we're committed. The siege cannon is S12, which means it has the same power as the last cannon, just through sheer explosive force. Well, considering this gun is meant for Krieg, and Krieg are just Imperial Germans, I would be remiss to compare the siege cannon to anything but Big Bertha. But I won't, because we have a better option for Bertha. So, for the siege cannon, we're going to go with the M115 howitzers, which is the souped up American version of the British 8-inch howitzer Mark VI. A 203mm cannon firing 200-pound shells carrying explosives equivalent to 51 pounds of TNT. 25% of this shell's weight is explosives, with a lethality range of 7 meters blast and 27 meters frag. This is a good one to use because it's upscaled from the 155, but is a cannon that was placed into a vehicle chassis and produced in large numbers. This is the cannon I would personally state would fit not only the siege cannon, but the Medusa cannon as well, considering it's also on a vehicle chassis. However, when you look at the Medusa cannon, you can see the inspirations from Big Bertha, so let's talk about that. Except there's not much to say about the Medusa cannon. It has a similar profile to the siege cannon, with only higher AP and damage, which makes sense if they intended for this to be a Big Bertha, as she is a 420mm howitzer, with shells weighing in 900 pounds. That would mean the 900-pound shell would carry round about 135 pounds of explosive filler, giving it a lethal range of 9 meters through explosives and 37 meters through frag. You could be at the 50-yard line on a football field, have this shell land in the end zone, and you'd still be in danger of dying from shrapnel. I can only assume the reason these guns are damaged 2, 3, or 4 in the case of the Medusa is A, for balance, and B, to symbolize that it's only this deadly against armor with a direct hit or near direct hit depending. And so you need to fire a lot of shots to ensure that direct hit, especially if using indirect fire. Still, this is still strength 12, when the Demolisher tank is strength 14, and let's be real, that main gun is probably based on real life assault guns that were more than likely 150mm cannons. So that's ass backwards, and I just don't have time to get into it. But wait, it gets even more ridiculous. The Medusa has an SPG version, which, when you look into the weight of Big Bertha, makes you question the ability to put a can that size into a moving vehicle. It just seems like something that isn't possible. And the Soviets built one. Oh, you fucking Russians. This is the 2B1 Oka, an SPG with a 400mm cannon. They not only made one, but 4 of these monsters. Turns out Shelby was right. Torque really does matter more than speed. So yeah, I guess you could put a cannon comparable to Big Bertha onto a moving vehicle, though these were designed to fire tac nukes, which as an American, I can't say anything. We had the Davy Crockett. But fuck it. Let's keep this wild train going. I heard you like artillery, and one isn't enough.
Well, the Mechanicus gave you another one with the Minotaur, an SPG with 2 Earthshaker cannons built on the chassis of a Malcador tank. I guess someone figured the sustained fire rate of the Basilisk was too low, and this was the answer. That being said, on tabletop, I would absolutely use this as an assault gun instead of indirect fire. T11 2-up saves 18 wounds with a -1 incoming damage, plus a twin-linked Earthshaker cannon, and this vehicle would cause problems. But this is just too much. A double-barreled SPG that doesn't seem possible. How would you even fit that in the chassis and the turret? And dadgummit, the fucking Russians did it again. The 2S-35 Koalitia, or Coalition, and thank God this was just a prototype, and not a production model. But again, it just shows GW wasn't completely off its rocker when they made this, and to be honest, probably got the idea for the Minotaur from the Coalition. But we'll end it there. I have completely gone over my normal time limit, but turns out when you try to justify strings for different artilleries used by the guards, you end up in the weeds and start to ramble. For those of you who've made it this far, thank you for listening. Tell me if I chose good comparisons or if there was something you thought fit better. Like and sub, I'd really like to break 100 subs, so your help in that would be appreciated. And as always, I'll see you next time, out in the warp.